had said about Jeff the Barber, and I wanted to add a couple more to it. Stuart Carr went there one time and got a free haircut. And when Jeff came in the next day, there was a piece of paper taped to the door. It was for an hour of billable time that it took while Stuart was waiting. And in my past, I worked as a veterinarian in town here and ran a clinic. And a number of years ago, Jeff gave me a free haircut. And when he arrived at work the next day, he had a box of kittens at his front door. So it's my honor tonight to introduce our speaker, John Weese. And I didn't write this speech, he did. Our guest speaker tonight began his media career at the age of 14 with a weekly column in the North Kent Leader, writing about horse racing. Hundreds of newspaper columns, radio editorials, and even a cable television show have followed, all under the banner of Weese's Pieces. When not informing and often infuriating his audiences, John enjoyed a 30-year career as a media executive, directing numerous newspaper and radio operations throughout southwestern and midwestern Ontario. This included the position of Vice President of Operations with Blackburn Radio. His passion then and now has been teaching and mentoring. Currently, he is a part-time professor at St. Clair College in Windsor, as well as a creator and facilitator of leadership development programs for both private and public organizations. Ever the student, he's currently enrolled at the University of Windsor, working on his degree in communications. He is also a longtime Rotarian, a Toastmaster, a former board member for several organizations, and a community volunteer, including being the founder of the Dresden Sports Hall of Fame. Please welcome home John Weese.
Appreciate it.
More than 25 years ago, it was in February, one of the biggest upsets in sports history occurred. That was the night when the undefeated and undisputed heavyweight champion of the world, the seemingly indestructible Mike Tyson, was shockingly knocked out by a relative unknown from Columbus, Ohio by the name of Buster Douglas. Many may remember that. Big story. This made headlines around the world. It was the lead story on every major newscast, except for CBC North. Their lead story was about a southwestern Ontario columnist who inflamed the mayor of Timmins and who was officially unwelcomed ever to return to that community again. More on this story later. I've made my career out of expressing myself, mostly in words, in print, and in broadcast. It's made for a very interesting career and some expensive dental work along the way. I noticed that the language has changed a bit over the last few years in the use of words. I think we can blame the millennials for that. We seem to blame them for a lot of other things. Two words that I think are overused and often misused, and perhaps some of us older folks would agree, but the word awesome and blessed. You know, I can remember a day when awesome was used to describe a wonder of the world, or Van Gogh's Starry Night. Now it's used to describe craft beer, usually. It's awesome. Blessed is another word. Every day I hear from people who walk around saying, I'm so blessed. I'm blessed. It's become so cliche. Even atheists are claiming that they're blessed. All of that being said, to be invited here tonight, back in Dresden, and to see all you wonderful folks, and family and friends, this is awesome. Damn, I'm blessed. Sorry, preacher. The fact that this is a Rotary event makes it that much sweeter. District Governor Barry was talking about proceeds from Rotary efforts like the one tonight. Does an amazing amount of work in our community, and if you look at the program, you'll see exactly where the dollars go. But it also does work internationally as well, to eradicate polio and to help the most vulnerable people on the planet. I don't want to be over the top. Lord knows I don't want to be over the top, but the money that you spent tonight could actually save somebody's life. And please remember that, just in case this speech sucks. My wife Ellie and I are Rotarians. I lovingly call her wife 2.0, and she's there. Thank you, Ellie. We've been Rotarians now for, about a dozen years, 12 years, maybe more. We got close working in a 4x4 trailer selling hot dogs. You remember that? That's what the kids are calling it now, selling hot dogs. Both Ellie and I come from family backgrounds of community service. As a young physician, Ellie's father worked in a mission up in northern Alberta, and her mom taught school, I believe, to Native children. In fact, Ellie was born in Lamont, Alberta, a mission. I wouldn't be surprised if she was also conceived in a mission area. My parents belonged to the Kinsman Club, the Kinsman Association, Kinsman and Kinnetts. Both past presidents. Dad was a lifetime member, and I know they really enjoyed their time in Kinsman. Dad particularly enjoyed his time in Kinsman. I remember having a conversation with John Roberts a few years ago. And we were reminiscing on the telephone about those days when we were little kids and we'd run around the Kinsman Hall. And we're remarking about how small that hall is when you go back as an adult, and it seems so narrow in there. And then we got thinking further, how old were we when we were just little kids? We were 7 or 8 years old. When was this? Oh, this was Saturday morning. Saturday morning? What were we running around the Kinsman Hall on Saturday morning? And then it struck me our dads were downstairs, drinking beer and playing cards. I assure you they weren't stuffing food hampers. Which leads me to conclude that the Kinsman Club really was a drinking club with a service problem. Which I'm sure that's changed now. John's brother, Donnie Roberts, who I'm surprised isn't here, but apparently they're working on the house tonight. John called me up, John Roberts, he was down from Edmonton, and he invited his brother Donnie down to Caesar's Windsor. And so I agreed to join them, and we were doing our regular gambling thing, and out of the blue, Donnie Roberts says, "You know, Johnny," Donnie Roberts does a Killer Lee Roberts impersonation. "You know, Johnny, we were so lucky. We were just so lucky to be able to grow up in Dresden." He was with me, I agreed. Play all the sports, I agreed. And we won championships, and that's where he lost me. You know, it's not that I don't have championship jackets and banners and medals and all that stuff. It's up into the attic. I have all those spoils too. Except mine say trainer, stick boy, announcer. And for the very first time, I'm going to confess to my children who are here tonight, your dad wasn't a very good athlete. It comes as a shock. Though, I did play a fair bit of baseball. In fact, I even had a nickname. They called me Mr. Home Run. It's flattering. Well, flattering until you consider I was a pitcher. And not so much. A little bit about my Wonder Bread years, or in Dresden, Burns's Bakery years. I was the second of a couple of siblings born to Bill and Doreen Weese. Thankful that my older brother Jim could be here tonight. Or as he likes to be referred to casually as Dr. James. Yes, we have a doctor in the family. Not the kind you would want at the bedside of a loved one. But nevertheless, a doctor. God, he bullied the hell out of me as a kid. More on that story a little later. My mother. Many people in here would remember Mom. A great lady, sweet lady. She was a hairdresser. She had the beauty salon in town that I would affectionately call on the radio Doreen's Curl Up and Die. Oh, Johnny. She had a good business. It was a good business. She was able to, almost single-handedly fund 1.5 educations out of that. And man, that was a gossipy place, though. Oh, man, the gossip. Second only, perhaps, to the Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce. My dad, Mom was a hairdresser, Dad was a nervous wreck. An ambitious young businessman who accomplished more by the age of 30 than many people did in a couple of lifetimes. He reminded me of George Bailey of It's a Wonderful Life, who was going to lasso to the moon. He was Trump, and we were the Trump family. It seemed to have a much sweeter connotation to it a few years ago. My brother got trumper, and I got trumpet. Boy, that got me far at the bars, let me tell you. Although when I was little, I better resembled a tuba more than I did a trumpet. And we moved a lot. I think 5 different residences that we lived in, but all within a 3-block radius. It was the strangest. The one good thing about that is the dog never got lost. Al's here tonight, and I'm so delighted that Al's here. And Mom and Al enjoyed many, many great years together. I always thought it was interesting where Al lives now in Mom's last residence was in the shadow of both our first family home when you looked out the front window, and when you looked out the back, you saw our last family home when we were together. It's true. I remember calling Mom over to the window and I said, "There, that's exactly where Jim broke my arm, playing touch football." True story. In fact, he was grooming himself to be a doctor because he tried to reset my arm that day. There was a lady in the neighborhood, fortunately, who was able to take me to the doctor. I can't remember who that lady was, except Dad called her Hog Pen. Get Hog Pen. Oh, man. Please forgive me, Hog Pen, wherever you are. My goodness. I'm delighted that my grandchildren are just, again, this could be one of the stops where the dog would go, are just over on Mooney Street. And Clark, my grandson's here tonight. I'm so proud of him and everything. And his sisters. They can experience the wonderment of growing up in Dresden because it really is a special little community. I agree with Donnie Roberts wholeheartedly. Although I gotta say that the complexion of Dresden has changed a lot than when I was growing up. Dresden back then really was black and white. Much like the big family televisions that we used to get from John Schaefer. You'd pull in those 3 stations. My God, this thing was the size of a Buick, and black and white TV. Mom always had to get her television from John Schaefer. Must have been the cologne he was wearing or something. For those who still live in town, I'm sure you agree that there is a lot less black families in Dresden than there were when we were going. Educational opportunities and job opportunities have driven the new generations mostly out of town. I don't think our town's better for, certainly, maybe not as interesting by losing some of our black families. In fact, at one time, we lived in a black neighborhood. We lived next door to Travis's, Campbell's, Highgate's, Robbins, Henson, Davies, and Bob Squires for some reason. I just didn't fit. Let's look at Nathan Johnson of our Nathan John, or whatever the character is in The Jerk there. But anyway, Bob was always a good neighbor, actually. He was always kind enough to give Jim or I offers a ride to grade 7 and on his motorcycle. Just down the road from where we lived on Park Street at that point was the historic Uncle Tom's cabin. And the final resting spot in the home of great work of Reverend Josiah Henson. Probably the first and most famous person to come out of Dresden and be associated with Dresden, but certainly wouldn't be the last. This little town has produced some wonderful talent over the years. Real big sports town. So a lot of our heroes were hockey heroes. And we lost a real good one last week with the passing of Kenny Houston. Wonderful. And how Kenny inspired so many other young men to know that making the NHL is more than a pipe dream. And he inspired so many kids to go on and play professional hockey. In fact, if you look at the back of the arena, I smile every time I see those banners at the back. And Dave Cameron, I give you a lot of credit for that. Is Dave Kelly on one of those banners at the back? Not yet. Anybody remember Dave Kelly? Okay. Dave Kelly didn't grow up in Dresden. He grew up in Wallaceburg. But he played junior hockey in Dresden, and he went on to play in the National Hockey League. And it's one of the biggest mysteries ever. Because I didn't think he was that good. I'd never make it as a hockey scout. One year, he scored twice. And one of those with one of the McGee sisters at the back of the arena. But more, there's more, but more than just hockey players, we have produced some great harness racing drivers and other sports. Archery, Hall of Fame. Mush, how many Hall of Fame? Morton Crosby's been like planet champion of archery or something. But I think outside of sports, people have made some tremendous contributions in representing our town. In politics, in education, in medicine, business, law, and law enforcement. My goodness, I don't think any little town has produced as many police chiefs over the years as what Dresden has. And there's likely some other categories I'm forgetting about. But I can't forget about media. We have a table right over here. You know, some mornings I can't start my car. Gary Patterson's here. He started his own radio station a few years ago. It's remarkable. Jay Stevens is here tonight. He's doing great things in the city of London as an afternoon host with Virgin Radio. And so delighted that you came down. We've had Bruce Hobbs. Fast Eddie Wilmot. Did the news for years in London. Tessa Wilmot. There are others. I can't turn on a television, watch the Tigers play without seeing Trevor Thompson interviewing some of my favorite Detroit Tigers. That is just a big thrill for me. I don't know what it is about small towns that make them such great incubators of such wonderful talent. It'd be a good question for Malcolm Gladwell, the Pulitzer Prize winning author, who wrote Outliers, The Blank, The Tipping Point. He could address that. He could also point to himself. He grew up in Elmira. John Kenneth Gilbert, the architect of finance under the Kennedy administration from Iona Station. Frederick Banting grew up in Allison. London tries to claim it, but he grew up in Allison. There's lots of examples out there. Yeah, Justin Bieber from Stratford. And then there's Shania Twain. Fruit Bug used to spell her name with an R. You know, unless you're from Dresden, you haven't got a clue what the hell. See something about fruit bugs? Yeah. No, I'm just kidding about Fruit Bug. He couldn't spell. But Shania Twain, of course, is from Timmins, which leads me right back to Timmins. I told I'd get back to that story. So, long time ago, when my wife, at the time, wife I lovingly referred to as 1.0, decided that we should make a holiday in February to Timmins. It was such a long, white-knuckled, pain-in-the-ass drive that I have ever made. Are we there yet, Daddy? And the three kids. No, we just left North Bay. Do you guys remember any of this? Amanda's nodding. Kaylee, you'd be just young. Casey was a baby. You guys were still in strollers. So we roll into Timmins. Anybody been to Timmins? Wow. Awesome. You're blessed. So we roll into Timmins and we get we stay at the beautiful Senator Hotel. It is an awesome place. You're right. Likely most weekends when they don't have a First Nations convention sharing the same hotel with you. How can you say the place was awesome? This is the kind of place that would steal your towels. So we stayed at this hotel. We're up on the 7th floor, which is okay if the elevators work. And we didn't get a lot of sleep that night. Not because we were reveling, but because that First Nations concert, who I'm sure during the conference, I'm sure during the day did some important work, no question. But at night, not so much. They partied like rock stars. So we didn't get any sleep. Well, further complicating that was that somebody thought it'd be a great idea to pull a fire alarm at 2 in the morning. And we had to carry our kids down the stairs, out into the cold winter's night. Bad enough it happened once. It actually happened twice. Why Timmins, you ask? I've asked it every day for... The reason we went to Timmins in the first place is because my wife at the time, who I lovingly refer to as 1.0, wanted to show off the baby to her best friend, Helen, who lived in Timmins. Helen, who I lovingly refer to as Hell. Helen and I never hit it off, ever. We had sort of an Archie Maude thing going on. I just found her to be a bit opinionated and flexible, and you know the type. So, after the sleepless night at the Senator Hotel, we were scheduled to have dinner at Helen's. And she made a lovely meal that I thought was steak. She fooled me, that old Helen. And I've been spitting out moose meat or swamp donkey or whatever the hell that was for... I couldn't wait to get out of Timmins. Came home late Sunday night. And it struck me that I had to have a newspaper column ready to go the next morning. So, of course, the lowest hanging fruit was my adventures to Timmins. And I was my sarcastic best. I had great fun ripping up Timmins. I felt it was safe back then. This was before social media. But not before fax machines. I forgot about that. And sure enough, I figured this column, this Weese's Pieces column, is going to run in 2 or 3 local papers. What's the odds of anybody ever in Timmins even seeing this article? Pretty good, as it turned out. There was an expatriate from Timmins who was an executive at Union Gas. You could hardly wait to clip that sucker out and fax it over to the Honorable Victor Power, Mayor of Timmins, who hit the roof, fighted in all the media, and tore a lot of strips off me that day, and officially unwelcomed me ever to return to Timmins again. This was followed by radio interviews, being a lead story on the news, editorial cartoons, and it was kind of fun for the first 3 or 4 days, and after that I'm just praying that something will happen, a dog will get hit, something will happen in Timmins to knock me off the headlines. You know, I've never been back to Timmins since. And it doesn't break my heart. You know what would break my heart? What would break my heart if I was never welcomed back to Dresden? And I mean that sincerely. We'll see how it goes after this talk tonight. Please have me back. I'm just thinking of what could happen. I'm trying to think, what the heck was I saying? I want to thank you so much for inviting me to be here tonight. This has really been a thrill to be able to come and give this talk. I've had a great time. It's wonderful to have so many friends and familiar faces in my family. Even Casey got off the couch and came from Toronto. Good, thank you. My daughters, they're wonderful. They'd do anything. Case, 50-50. But you know I love you just like you're my own. Anyway. So I want to thank the Dresden Rotary Club, and I want to thank you for supporting Rotary, and I want to sincerely from the bottom of my heart thank you for inviting me here tonight. And before I go, I have one more little story if you're interested. Ladies and gentlemen, the mayor of Timmins, Vic Power, is here tonight. Okay, here's my little story. I'll be brief. How many people here had the luxury of being taught by Mrs. Rigsby? Remember Mrs. Rigsby? Wonderful kindergarten teacher. She was about 4'5". Just a sweetheart of a lady. It's funny what you remember of people, though. I remember her for her eye makeup. She had this bright blue. I think she shared the makeup artist with Sir Graves Ghastly or something, but sweet little lady. You know, our first day at school, I remember that. First day at school, Mrs. Rigsby wanted to have a little bit of an ice-breaking ordeal, and she wanted the kids to get to know one another, and she wanted to get to know about us. It was all very sweet, and she said, okay, what we're going to do today, children, is we're going to learn about each other. We want you each to tell a story about a family member, and it's got to be true. And you have to share with us what lesson that you got from the story. Well, my arm shot up right away. I was eager to share. But Mrs. Rigsby didn't pick me. Early surveillance, I suspect, but no, she gazed upon the classroom and she saw little Mary McCracken sitting there. Little Mary shot up her hand and Mrs. Rigsby said, "Mary, do you have a story for us?" "I sure do, Mrs. Rigsby. My dad, he works at the Dresden Produce. They call it the Blood and Gut. And one day, Mrs. Rigsby, they told my dad that he had to take a load of turkey eggs over to Tupperville, and he was in a rush. And anyway, he put all the eggs into one basket, and when he got there, some of the eggs were broken, and he only got paid for the eggs that weren't cracked." And Mrs. Rigsby said, "Well, that's a fascinating little story there, Mary, but I fail to see what the lesson could be in that." To which Mary replied, "Well, Mrs. Rigsby, I think the lesson is that you don't put all your eggs into one basket." And Mrs. Rigsby liked that. She goes, "That's a great lesson, Mary. Thank you for sharing. Is there anyone else in the classroom this morning that would like to share a story?" And of course, I was waving my arm like I was hailing a cab in a hurricane. And again, Mrs. Rigsby didn't pick me. No. She had to pick little Sally Jenkerson. "Sally, do you have a story to share?" I sure do, Mrs. Rigsby. My dad, he also works at the Blood and Gut. And he had to deliver eggs that were just about to hatch over to Wallaceburg. And so he loaded up his truck and went over to Wallaceburg. But you know what, Mrs. Rigsby? He got there quicker than he thought he would be. And some of the eggs hatched, but some of them didn't. And he only got paid for the eggs that hatched. She goes, "Oh, I'm really sorry to hear that your dad suffered, a little bit of an economic setback there, but other than that, I'm not getting the story." She goes, "Well, Mrs. Rigsby, I think the story is you don't count your turkeys before they hatch." She goes, "Oh, of course. And that's another great lesson." Johnny? Does your dad work at the Blood and Gut too? "No, Mrs. Rigsby, Dad doesn't work at the Blood and Gut. Not even about my dad." She goes, "Oh, well, who would it be about? Family member?" I said, "Well, this one's about my cousin Paul." Cousin Paul Weese. And a smile came to Mrs. Rigsby's face. "Oh, he's such a wonderful child. He's one of my favorite students." "Well, tell us about the story." I said, "Well, I'm happy to tell the story about Cousin Paul. One day, Mrs. Rigsby, Cousin Paul had a family barbecue in the backyard, and it was a grand affair. Everybody from our family was there. Well, anyway, Cousin Paul was barbecuing in the backyard, and anyway, his cousins, Ted and Alan, were feeding him beer. Lots of beer. And Cousin Paul accidentally got drunk, and this was very uncharacteristic of Cousin Paul. That's how I spoke in kindergarten. Cousin Paul got accidentally drunk, and he stumbled into the barbecue, and he knocked the hot coals all over the yard, and the food, oh, it was a mess, Mrs. Rigsby. And, it was a particularly dry summer, and the grass caught on fire, and it started to spread, and it went into the gardens, Linda's beautiful gardens, and it went It went up the fence to the neighbors, and over into the Geniac's yard, and it caught on fire. It was just an awful mess. And someone called the fire department, and good thing there was no hockey championship being celebrated that day. The fire truck was available. And so Ronnie Law and his merry men came racing down the street. My old neighbor Bob Squires was driving the truck. And Mrs. Rigsby, he hit the gas instead of the brake, and he plowed that truck right into the carport of Cousin Paul's house. And she goes, I think we've heard enough. And besides, what possible lesson could you get out of that? I said, well, Mrs. Rigsby, I would conclude that you don't screw with Cousin Paul when he's drinking. Thank you, folks.